This evening, we begin with U.S. President Donald Trump's Tuesday night address to a joint session of Congress, the nation and the world. Speaking in a more moderate tone, President Trump urged a divided United States to embrace what he called a renewal of the American spirit as he laid out his ambitious agenda to revitalize America's economy, tighten borders, boost military spending, and overhaul health care. VOA's national correspondent Jim Malone has more.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Donald Trump got a warm welcome from Republicans and a polite greeting from Democrats as he outlined his policy priorities, including his campaign promise to secure the U.S. border.
We want all Americans to succeed, but that can't happen in an environment of lawless chaos. We must restore integrity and the rule of law at our borders. We will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border.
Trump said his agenda would herald what he called a new chapter of American greatness that would include tax reform, better trade deals for American workers, and repealing and replacing President Barack Obama's health care law.
Obamacare is collapsing, and we must act decisively to protect all Americans.
Trump vowed to keep America safe from terrorists, but also offered what he called direct, robust, and meaningful engagement with the world.
America is willing to find new friends and to forge new partnerships where shared interests align. We want harmony and stability, not war and conflict.
The president also paid tribute to Navy SEAL Ryan Owens, killed in January during a raid on an al-Qaeda base in Yemen, with his widow Corinne looking on in the gallery.
Ryan died as he lived, a warrior and a hero, battling against terrorism and securing our nation.
Trump renewed his call for unity after a divisive election, and he urged Americans to think big.
The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us. We just need the courage to share the dreams that fill our hearts, the bravery to express the hopes that stir our souls, and the confidence to turn those hopes and those dreams into action.
Former Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear gave the Democratic response, and he criticized Trump for his moves to undo Obamacare and restrict immigration.
The president can and should enforce our immigration laws, but we can protect America without abandoning our principles and our moral obligation to help those fleeing war and terror, without tearing families apart, and without needlessly jeopardizing our military men and women fighting overseas.
And now the hard work begins as Trump and members of Congress begin the task of trying to implement his ambitious agenda.
While joining us now with more insight on President Trump's Tuesday night address is VOA National Correspondent Jim Malone. Jim, welcome back, and
Thank you,
glad to have you with us. Now, what everybody's talking about is the tone.
Yes.
What was so different about President Trump's tone last night?
We had a softer tone. We had someone who is a little more upbeat and optimistic, especially if you compare it with his inaugural address where he talked about American carnage. That was kind of a dark vision. So I think a lot of people now, supporters, critics, analysts, are all trying to figure out, is this tone here to stay? Have we seen the long-awaited presidential pivot by Donald Trump from a kind of rabble-rousing campaigner during the election campaign to a president now who wants to govern and be more bipartisan and more cooperative in outlook?
But listening closely to the speech, you still got the sense that he still had the same kind of lines from the past where it creates the impression that he inherited a disaster and therefore, of course, said a few things that Democrats are not necessarily celebrating about. So was he really at all trying in any way to bridge this big divide?
Yeah, that's the other question, I think, Vincent, is he just putting a gloss on what we see and have heard about as really a very nationalistic agenda, very focused on revitalizing the American economy, reasserting America's place in the world, After all, he's proposing a huge increase in military spending, but then cuts in things like diplomacy and foreign aid abroad. So that also is sending a signal. But certainly in terms of tone, in terms of speaking to the American people, not diverting from the script, we did see a different Donald Trump last night, perhaps the kind of Donald Trump that even some of his supporters have been hoping for some time.
Yes. And then he did talk about trying to not interfere with other nations' sovereignty. When some listen to this, they kind of get confused. What does this mean for America and the rest of the world? And people look at America as, the big boy in the world.
Yeah, and I think there are more blanks that need to be filled in there. He at one point said, I'm not basically representing the entire world. I'm focused on representing the United States. And a lot of Americans are okay with that idea. But where does he see America's role in the world? If he's going to increase military force in terms of capabilities and resources, does that mean he's any more interested in perhaps using that military in some situations? Again, he's talked about not wanting to get drawn into international conflicts, but also he wants to see the United States as a beacon for peace.
And of course, increase in military spending, and when some listen to this, they think that means more involvement by the U.S. abroad. But he says, I don't want to involve myself we don't want conflict and war. We want peace and harmony.
Yeah, and I think, especially for viewers in Africa, it's not clear that he does want to expand U.S. involvement in a lot of things beyond the United States. And look, for the next several months, it'll be consumed with domestic priorities. He's got to try to right the economy, get more jobs going, and deal with this healthcare situation, which is going to be enormously complicated. And there may be some cracks already forming among members of his own Republican Party as to how they proceed on this. Healthcare is a difficult issue for presidents. Just ask Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
And of course, the president actually just the other day said, it never occurred to us how tough this is.
That's right.
Jim,
That's right.
as always, we appreciate your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Well, national correspondent Jim Malone joining us today.